named Massey, and I said, go your own way. And once I left her, she resigned because she would never have survived a primary. But I think she's a nice person. Okay, thank you very much.
It's not a State of the Union address, but it has most of the trappings. Tonight offers President Trump his biggest moment since the inauguration to tell Americans what he wants to do as president and possibly to turn around impressions after a bumpy beginning. John Yang begins our coverage from the White House.
Thank you all very much.
President Trump spent today getting ready for prime time, tonight's address to a joint session of Congress.
It's a busy day, and then I guess tonight will be a rather busy night. We look forward to it.
Senior administration officials say he'll tout the campaign promises he's kept in his 5 weeks in office and offer an optimistic look into the future. In a Fox News interview that aired this morning, he acknowledged some shortfalls, specifically on his travel ban order.
I give myself an A+, effort, but that's, results are more important.
It didn't start with tanks or troops. It started with something far more alarming. Lawmakers quietly drafting legislation to stop a sitting American president from launching wars on impulse. That alone should tell you how close the system is to snapping. Because Congress does not rush to write laws banning a president from invading Greenland unless they believe the threat is real. They do not stage emergency votes to claw back war powers unless they believe the commander-in-chief is actively testing how far he can go before the Constitution stops him. And they certainly do not do it with bipartisan backing unless something has gone profoundly off the rails. This is not a policy disagreement. This is an intervention. Strip away the noise, and here is what actually happened. The United States Senate held a vote on a binding war powers resolution aimed squarely at Donald Trump's escalating posture toward Venezuela. The language was blunt. It did not ask politely. It did not suggest consultation. It ordered the president to terminate the use of U.S. armed forces in hostilities unless Congress explicitly authorized further action. That is Congress invoking its most fundamental authority, the power to decide when America goes to war. The vote was a deadlock. 50 senators voted to restrain Trump. 50 voted to let him continue unchecked. In a functioning democracy, that alone would be a 5-alarm fire. But the final blow came when the tie was broken by the vice president, who stepped in to kill the resolution. Not with debate, not with justification, with a single procedural vote that preserved Trump's unilateral war authority by the narrowest margin possible. Trump didn't win that vote. He escaped it. And the escape was so narrow that it sent shockwaves through both parties, because 3 Republican senators broke ranks and voted to limit their own president's war powers. That almost never happens, not on foreign policy, not in a hyper-partisan era where defying Trump can end a political career. Those votes were not symbolic, they were warnings. What made the moment truly destabilizing is that this was not about some distant hypothetical threat. This was about real actions already underway. Trump's administration has been escalating pressure on Venezuela through aggressive military signaling, coercive economic measures, and rhetoric that openly flirts with regime change by force. There have been reports of covert operations, threats against foreign officials, and assertions that the president can dictate outcomes in a sovereign nation without congressional input. This is not diplomacy. It is executive improvisation with a military attached. And Congress knows the pattern. Once troops are deployed, once operations begin, lawmakers are politically boxed in. History has shown this again and again. Presidents act first. Congress debates later. By the time the body count rises, opposition becomes framed as disloyalty rather than oversight. That is why this vote mattered. It was Congress trying to stop the slide before momentum made resistance impossible. But Venezuela was only half the picture. While the Senate was narrowly failing to rein Trump in, something even more extraordinary was unfolding in the House of Representatives. Lawmakers introduced legislation specifically designed to prevent Donald Trump from invading Greenland or any other NATO territory without explicit congressional authorization. Pause on that sentence. Let it register. The United States Congress is writing laws to stop an American president from invading the territory of a NATO ally. This is not satire. This is not cable news exaggeration. This is the legislative branch responding to repeated public statements by Trump suggesting that Greenland should belong to the United States and that force remains an option if Denmark refuses to sell it. That is not normal. That is not a joke. That is not a negotiating tactic. That is a president openly entertaining territorial expansion through coercion against an ally outside of any legal framework. The Greenland legislation is bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats are co-sponsoring it. That fact alone detonates the usual partisan defenses. This is not the left attacking Trump reflexively. This is lawmakers across the spectrum acknowledging that something dangerous is unfolding and that the guardrails must be reinforced before they collapse entirely. The bill does not ask Trump to consult Congress. It bars him from acting without authorization. It draws a hard legal line. Cross it, and the president would be in direct violation of federal law. Another bill goes even further, deliberately closing loopholes. It covers not just invasion, but any attempt to take Greenland through force, coercion, or intimidation. The language is broad because lawmakers have watched Trump exploit ambiguity before. They are not interested in clever workarounds. They are interested in prevention. This is Congress saying, in unmistakable terms, that the presidency is not a throne. What connects Venezuela and Greenland is not geography, it is mindset. In both cases, Trump is treating military power as a personal instrument rather than a national one. He speaks as though the authority to reshape borders, topple governments, and threaten allies flows directly from his will rather than from the Constitution. This is where pattern recognition becomes unavoidable. Donald Trump has consistently shown contempt for constraints, legal constraints, institutional constraints, ethical constraints. When the Justice Department resists, he pressures it. When Congress investigates, he obstructs. When courts rule against him, he delegitimizes them. January 6th was not an anomaly. It was the logical endpoint of a worldview that rejects limits. The war powers fight is simply the foreign policy extension of that same impulse. The framers of the Constitution were explicit about this for a reason. Article 1 grants Congress the power to declare war, not the president, not the military. Congress. They had studied history. They understood how easily republics slide into autocracy when war-making authority is concentrated in one person. They designed friction into the system on purpose. What Trump is attempting to do is erase that friction. Supporters will argue that presidents have long exercised broad military authority. That is true, and it is precisely the problem. Over decades, Congress has allowed war powers to atrophy through neglect and fear. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 was supposed to restore balance, but it has been ignored, bypassed, or treated as optional by successive administrations. What makes this moment different is the scale and the brazenness. Trump is not responding to an imminent attack. He is floating invasions. He is discussing annexation. He is signaling to allies and adversaries alike that American military force is negotiable leverage in personal deals. That crosses a line from executive discretion into imperial behavior. Legally, the implications are severe. If Congress passes these bills and Trump defies them, the country enters uncharted constitutional territory. That would not be a policy dispute. That would be a direct violation of federal law by the President of the United States. It would raise immediate questions about impeachment, judicial intervention, and military compliance. And make no mistake, the military would be placed in an impossible position. Service members swear an oath to the Constitution, not to a president. If ordered to participate in an unauthorized invasion of Allied territory, the legality of those orders would be in doubt. That is how democracies fracture. Not all at once, but through cascading crises that force institutions to choose sides. This is why lawmakers are acting now. They are trying to prevent a scenario where the only options left are catastrophic. The timing matters. These bills are being introduced as Trump's rhetoric grows more aggressive, not after the fact. Congress is attempting to reassert itself proactively, rather than scrambling once the damage is done. That alone is an admission that the normal assumptions no longer apply. What makes this even more destabilizing is Trump's continued grip on his party. Republican lawmakers know the risks. Defying him invites primary challenges, online harassment, and political isolation. Yet some are stepping forward anyway. That is not courage for its own sake. That is fear of consequences larger than personal careers. Zoom out further, and the war powers conflict slots neatly into a broader pattern of institutional corrosion. The politicization of the Justice Department, the obstruction of investigations, the selective release and suppression of information, the rewriting of January 6 as victimhood rather than insurrection, the use of state power to target enemies and shield allies. All of it points in the same direction: unchecked authority concentrated in one individual. That is why impeachment discussions persist. Each new attempt to bypass Congress on matters of war strengthens the argument that Trump is abusing the powers of his office. These are not isolated incidents. They are cumulative. They build a record. The question underneath all of this is brutally simple. Who decides when America goes to war? If the answer becomes whoever holds the presidency at the moment, then the Constitution has already failed in practice, even if it remains intact on paper. If Congress cannot enforce its authority when the stakes are this high, then no future boundary will matter. The international consequences are just as dire. Allies are watching. If the United States can openly threaten to seize Allied territory, what does collective security even mean? Why should any nation trust American commitments if they can be overridden by presidential impulse? This is how credibility collapses. Quietly at first, then all at once. History will not remember this moment as a procedural fight over resolutions and bills. It will remember it as a test of whether American democracy still has the muscle memory to restrain power before it metastasizes. Congress is drawing a line, not rhetorically, legally. The question now is whether that line holds or whether it is erased by defiance. If Trump respects it, the system survives bruised but intact. If he crosses it, the country enters a constitutional crisis with no modern precedent and no guaranteed outcome. And that is why this story matters. Not because of Greenland, not because of Venezuela, but because it exposes how close the United States is to finding out what happens when a president decides the rules no longer apply. If you want to understand how democracies fail, you don't watch the collapse. You watch the warnings people ignore before it happens. Stay alert to this one. Missing moments like this is how the fire spreads without anyone noticing until it's already out of control.